On today's podcast, we have as our guest the man who literally wrote the book, Ari Herstand. His book, How to Make It in the New Music Business, is the standard for independent artists. I have known Ari for, I guess, about 5-6 years now. I've had him as a guest in my class many times. He is so knowledgeable, he is so giving, and so understanding of the process. Why? Because he's an artist himself, and because he comes from that world. You're not going to want to miss this. There's a lot of great, informative information in this. Insiders, are you ready? Welcome to MUBUTV's Insider Podcast, where our mission is to educate, empower, and engage artists and music business professionals who are dedicated to having a successful career in the new music industry. Here are your hosts, Ritch, Esra, and Eric Knight.
Welcome back, Insiders, to another episode of the MUBUTV Insider Podcast, where our mission is to educate, empower, and engage your music career. On today's episode, we're with Ari Herstand, one of the leading voices in educating artists on how to build a successful career in today's new music business. But first, a quick word from our sponsor. Hey, Insiders, are you looking to take your music career to the next level? Then you need to know about the Music Business Registry. The Music Business Registry is the leading music industry publisher of the most up-to-date contact information for major and independent record label A&R, music publishers, artist managers, music attorneys, music supervisors, and much more. The Music Business Registry is the trusted industry standard and source serving the music business community for over 28 years with the most accurate and up-to-date contact information available. Their titles include the A&R Registry, the Film and Television Music Monthly, the Music Publisher Registry, and the Music Attorney Registry. All of their publications are available in print, PDF, CSV, or online subscription. Visit them now at musicregistry.com and receive a 10% discount by using coupon code MUBUTV10 at checkout. That's musicregistry.com, coupon code MUBUTV10. When you're ready to put your music to work, musicregistry.com.
Welcome back, Insiders. Today's featured interview is with none other than the great Ari Herstand. Ari is truly the leader in the independent artist movement of today, and artists really developing strong, successful careers in the new music business. This is a guy who really understands what the music business was and what it is today and what you specifically need to succeed in it. And he had so much great information. We did such a deep dive with him. You're going to really enjoy this.
Yeah, and what I love is that, we've had not only the guy who's written the book for the music business, the Bible, but, Ari, in a lot of respects, has written the industry Bible for independent musicians.
Absolutely. And the independent musician and what they need to succeed today, and the consciousness that they need to have around having a career. As we've talked about so many times in this show, Eric, that consciousness is such an important foundational element in order to even begin this journey.
Absolutely. And what definition of success is to each and every one of us, because for every one of us, it should be a different thing. So, Insiders, sit back, relax, and enjoy our featured interview with Ari Herstand.
Ari, thank you so much for doing this. We really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
I always like to start at the beginning with these interviews by asking each guest, do you remember at what point in your life that you made the decision that music was going to be your professional career path?
Yeah, actually. So I went to the University of Minnesota initially to be a high school band director. I was there studying classical trumpet and music education. And that first year, I should say that first semester, I popped into a coffee shop on campus, and there was a singer-songwriter playing there. And I had been kind of writing songs in my dorm room for the first time in my life, solo songs. I was in a band in high school, but we were kind of a ska band. And so I was writing more acoustic singer-songwriter songs in my dorm room for the first time. And I asked the barista there if I could get a show. And he opened up the calendar book and he was like, how about October 15th? I was like, great. I played that first show. There was some people that showed up and we recorded it. And I kind of listened back and I'm like, man, this doesn't suck. And I had an awakening at that show. I realized like nothing else made sense in my life up until that point, other than really performing. And I kind of made a decision right then that I was going to be a performing singer-songwriter, and that was going to be my life course. And so that first semester of college, I changed course completely, and I transferred to a music industry school studying songwriting and music business, and the rest is history, I guess.
And that leads us to the next question, Ari. You went on to a music business school to learn about the industry, kind of only to discover that when you got out that a lot of it wasn't applicable. And
Yes.
And it was all planned around getting signed to a big label and hopefully selling a lot of CDs. Can you, elaborate on that?
Absolutely. So yeah, you're exactly right. I went to this music industry school in 2005, and what they were teaching at that time was kind of how the industry had operated up until that point. And yes, they taught us there that the only way to really have a successful career in music was to get signed to a record label. And, a lot of our classes were on how to negotiate record label contracts and all of that. And when I got out of school, when I finished school, I was ready to start my career. So I'm like, okay, where's my record deal? I guess I was taught that I can't really have a career unless I get a record deal. So I'm ready. Where's the deal? Right. And the deal didn't come. So I said, well, I have two options here, I suppose. I can sit around waiting for this record deal to magically appear, or I can figure out how to make a music career happen on my own. And I chose the latter. And through trial and error, I learned how to kind of build a career on my own. And at my peak in Minneapolis, I was drawing 800 people to my shows, and I was selling out venues in a 5-state region. And I started to really kind of grow my career from the ground up, and all of this kind of figuring it out on my own, because what I was taught in school, yes, like you said, I very quickly realized that none of that was really applicable to what was happening in the music industry at the time. And I kind of really figured out how to build the career on my own and develop it that way.
Ari, as I'm listening to you, I'm realizing, that's the genesis of, what has become, in my view, a very, very significant career. I think, I'm comfortable saying to you without, any I don't want to make you uncomfortable, but you really have written the Bible for independent artists. How to make it in the new music business is considered to be the Bible for independent artists today. And as someone like myself who's been in this business for 40 years, I've got to say, you're the only one that I know who's successfully been able to take that from a roots level, a grassroots level, and actually, walk the walk, not just talk the talk, but walk the walk and take people through it. And what I've always loved about you as a artist and as a man is that you are completely willing to share what you have learned. It's a very deep spiritual principle about you don't see the world in terms of scarcity, you see it in terms of abundance. You don't see that there's not enough, there's plenty there. And my question to you is, I've heard you speak about where the inspiration for the book came from. You've talked about a lot of elements where you spoke to artists, where all of these kinds of new and innovative things were happening with independent artists, but no one was writing about it. They were writing about, how many vinyl records Adele sold, or how much, Taylor Swift or whoever. And I'm wondering, can you tell our audience exactly what the inspiration for the book was, because that wasn't something you were doing right at first?
That's true. And yeah, you're right. I don't believe in competition in the music industry. I believe that a rising tide lifts all ships. And I believe that we are stronger together as a music community and a musician community. And, I saw early on, as I was running my career, some of my favorite bands back in the day in kind of the mid 2000s or so, they were getting taken advantage of by record labels or by management, and they were kind of learning these things the hard way, in that they were kind of not only being taken advantage of, but because they were jumping into deals that were not favorable to them, or oftentimes their records didn't even come out, they ended up starting to break up. And it was breaking my heart every time I saw this. And or also on the other hand, these artists that were incredibly talented didn't know how to make a music career happen, and they didn't have representation, and they couldn't figure it out. And so they also ended up quitting music. And that also just continued to break my heart when I saw some such talented, incredible artists and just not being able to how to figure out how to make it work. And so that kind of became my mission, that whenever I learned something in my own career, I would share it with anyone who wanted the information. And, word kind of spread. Initially, it was just my peers in Minneapolis, but as I was touring more and playing colleges and high schools and festivals, I started to get messages from people, from musicians from all over the country, and just asking me basic things like, hey, how did you get that song placed on a TV show? Or how are you going on this tour? I heard you don't have a booking agent, or, we just, we signed this deal. Is this a good deal? And that kind of stuff. And I would get back to everybody who wrote in, and I would try to at least. And then after a while, it became overwhelming. I was getting too many questions that I could answer. And so I just didn't have time for that. So my brother is a web developer, and we decided to kind of create a blog and just put up all of the answers to the most frequently asked questions I was receiving, and just put all the information out there. So anytime I learned something, I would write about it. And then if someone wrote in a question, I'd say, oh yeah, I wrote about it. And I'd send them to the blog, to where I wrote about that. And then inevitably more questions came in. And so I would try to find the answers to those. And as I learned more things in my own career, I would write about it. But then because the blog kind of started to take off a bit, and other publications asked me to write for them. And because of that, I was then given access to kind of talk and sit down with anyone in the music industry that I wanted to. And so, whereas before I was just some independent musician with a blog, no one would return my emails. And now I was, a writer for Digital Music News or Music Connection magazine or what have you.
Right.
And now I could sit down with anyone. And so I kind of took that responsibility very seriously. I'm like, well, I'm this independent musician. No other musicians get this kind of access to sit down with the number 3 at Spotify, or to sit down with one of the heads of Red Light Management, or to sit down with the music supervisor for all these incredible shows. And now I get to. And so I would really ask them the questions that every musician had that we just couldn't ask them before. And then I would share that information. And after a while, as I was talking to more and more people in the industry, and especially artists and managers, learning how so many musicians were making a career happen in very interesting, innovative ways that no one, like you said, no one was talking about this.
Right.
Billboard wasn't writing about it. Yeah, they were writing about, all the records that Beyonce just broke or Ed Sheeran broke. And they weren't talking about how Dawn Byer made $100,000 from Facebook Live last year just from streaming from her bedroom. It's like, because that's not interesting to Billboard. $100,000, that's a drop in the bucket to any major label. But for independent artists, that's gigantic.
Yeah.
And they weren't writing about how Wolfpack was getting 1 million monthly listeners and was selling out the Greek theater based without a manager or without a label, and no one was really talking about this stuff. So yes, I kind of felt it was my duty and responsibility to share this information. And where the book came from, a lot of musicians came to me and they said, "Hey Ari, like I read all your blog posts. I really appreciate everything that you're sharing. However, I'm looking for something to connect the dots. I need some guidance in my career. What book should I read?" And now I've read most of the music business books out there. And unfortunately, at the time, there really wasn't a book out there that was discussing the new music business and guiding musicians of today. And so I was in this really interesting cross section where I was a working musician, I was a writer, and I had access to be able to talk to anyone in the industry, and was starting to see these stories and learn the tactics that artists and managers were utilizing to have successful careers. And I had that musician's empathy. So I wasn't a lawyer or a talking head that was like talking down to musicians. I was like, no, I understand how hard this is. And I feel you. Like I know what it's like to put out a song and for no one to care about that song. And for 2 months later, that still has less than 1,000 streams on Spotify. And I know what it's like to spend $5,000 on a music video for it to get less than 10,000 views within 4 months. And it's painful. Like, that's the kind of stuff that, people don't really understand unless you live it. And so it's one thing for lawyers to kind of talk at musicians and say, you need to do this and you're an idiot if you don't do this. It's like, yes, but at the other thing, they don't understand the emotional component, which is it is such a huge part of the equation of running a music career from the ground up. And so I really felt that, that all of that was kind of one of the main reason why I decided I needed to write this book and put this out there, because there really wasn't anything there for musicians.
Now, Ari, as a successful independent music artist such as yourself, what are some of the most important questions someone needs to be asking themselves before making the commitment to a music career?
Well, great question. It's I think from the beginning, is this can you envision yourself doing anything else? And is this a passion of yours, an absolute passion? It has to be. You can't run a music career unless this is your biggest passion in life, because no one is going to drive your career for you. No one is going to care about your career as much as you do. And it is hard. It is very challenging to run a music career, especially one initially on your own, but it's incredibly rewarding. And if your soul demands of you to pursue music, then it's you can't really fight that. I mean, you can get a corporate job, but it will be soul crushing. And I have talked to so many musicians in their 30s and their 40s and 50s that kind of gave up music in their 20s to pursue the life and career that they thought they were supposed to do, and start a family and get married and get that 9-to-5 job, because that was what society was telling them they were supposed to do, and they didn't really have any guidance on how to pursue a music career. And it's soul crushing. And they come to me decades later, and they're like, Ari, my soul is demanding that I do music. I cannot give this up. I have to do music. How can I do this? And so then we kind of discuss how they can make music part of the equation of how they've set up their life. So with any musician that's thinking about starting a career in music, the question to ask themselves is this truly my passion? Is this something that I need to do? And if it's just a hobby, that's not going to sustain you through the months of eating peanut butter and jelly and living on the road, or all this, the crushing rejection that you're going to receive from the internet or from the gatekeepers or whomever. It's you need a burning passion and desire, and something that is going to really that is so deep inside you, this fire that you'll get rejected 100 times and you're still be clear that this is what you need to do with your life, and that's the only thing that's really going to sustain you.
Ari, one of the things that I've always thought was so important about your work is that and I've seen you talk about this before, is that it's an important element that you say that every artist needs to define for themselves exactly what is success, what is their personal definition of success. Mm-hmm. And would you expand upon this concept and why you think it's so important? Because I think it's fundamental.
Absolutely. Yes. No one can define success for you. Success, I believe, is extremely personal. That's one of the biggest differences between the old music business and the new music business. In the old music business, success was defined very simply as selling millions of records. That was it. If you sold millions of records, you were successful. If you didn't, you were a failure. And it was pretty cut and dry. And there was just, really one way to run a music career and operate and be successful in the old music business. And that was, you get signed, you go on tour, you get songs on the radio. It was pretty cut and dry, pretty straightforward.
Yes.
Now in the new music business, there are 100 different ways to make a music career happen. And so every musician needs to decide what kind of career they want to have and what success looks like to them. Success could look like to an artist in Lincoln, Nebraska, as making $35,000 a year playing wedding gigs and wine bar gigs and supporting their family. And, occasionally getting syncs and putting songs out and making records and recording themselves on their own. Like that could be successful for an artist in Nebraska. And that's totally okay and totally fine. Success could also look like, for another artist, them making live streaming from their bedroom, kind of like I mentioned before, live streaming from the bedroom, making $10,000 a month, and setting up this routine where they connect with their audience, and they've built their audience from their bedroom, and they don't want to play live and they don't want to tour. And that's totally acceptable. There is no right or wrong in the new music business. It's kind of what makes sense for you. How do you want to set up your career? And how do you define success? And so that is going to be the guiding light for every artist when you get into the music industry, and when you decide that you're going to have a career in music, is you need to set up your goals. What kind of goals do you want to have, and what does success look like? Because then you're going to know what you're working for, and you can't let other people define success for you and tell you, oh, you're a failure if you don't have 100,000 Instagram followers, for instance. Like, I can tell you that I know people with 100,000 Instagram followers who have day jobs. So, I think with these numbers, we become obsessed with the numbers and these vanity metrics, and that can cloud our vision and that can cloud our direction. And so it's really important to have that goals sheet and really lay out your goals and really write down, what does success look like to you? And I can tell you, 100,000 Instagram followers is not success. That's not really something that should be on anyone's success sheet, because numbers are empty, and these are just vanity metrics that don't really have any bearing on whether you're going to be able to make a living doing music, which is what a lot of musicians have told me is their definition of success.
Absolutely. And I'm so glad that you said this, because, that is, and it's not said enough, and which is why I'm so glad you speak about this, is that in the old paradigm, there were very few options. There were very few, companies, and it was their way, and it was the one way. Today, there are many, many, many ways. What I find is the disconnect, and I'm curious if you see this, is that artists seem to still think, a lot of artists, not everyone, but a lot of artists seem to think there's still only one way, and it's to get signed to a label and to put a recording out, and to, that's the one way you do it. I find that today, and I'm curious if you agree with this, that the era that you talked about when you went to school, that we've left, that era, that we're in a whole new era today, and that the new era requires so much more. It demands so much more of the artists themselves in terms of their own accountability for their career than ever before. Is that an accurate statement? Or
yeah, absolutely. I mean, even A&R or executives at all the major labels, or any label, for instance, to be honest, will be the first to tell you that they're not going to pay attention to you until you've gotten your career to a level where you have an audience, you have a business, you have a fan base, and you're getting recognition or millions of streams on your own. So even if you think that you want that kind of traditional infrastructural support of a record label, okay, but the pathway to get there is still the pathway. It's the same path that independent artists need to make, which is build your career on your own. Avery Littman, the president of Universal Republic, when he was asked, how do you get a record deal? He said, don't try to get signed, try to become popular first.
Right.
And he runs Republic. Exactly. And so, the record labels are not really interested in artist development anymore. This isn't the 80s, No. Like they want a sure bet. And what's a sure bet is someone who's already built up their career on their own and already has a fan base. And so, they can give it a little boost, And so, and the thing is like, again, why you need to define what success looks like for you, because what major record labels are good at is creating superstars. That's what they know how to do. That's all they really know how to do. They're not interested in, getting, helping you earn $100,000 a year income.
No.
That doesn't help them out, because that is just a tiny fraction. that's like a write-off line item on their expense sheet. Like they're interested in the artists that are going to be bringing in millions a year, and that's how they become successful and profitable. The labels, that is how their businesses are set up. So, I think there will always be a place for the major record labels in the industry, but that's the superstar industry. But it's also worth noting that we're starting to see independent artists without record deals, especially without major record deals, without record deals at all, that are starting to reach those stratospheric levels of success. So if any artist or anyone will say, well, I want to play arenas, and I can only do that if I have a major record deal. Obviously, well, that's incorrect. Wolfpack just sold out Madison Square Garden. They don't have a label. They don't even have a manager, and they built this stuff up on their own. It's well, I want to win Grammys, and I can only win a Grammy with a major record deal. No, incorrect. Chance the Rapper won a Grammy for Best New Rapper, and he doesn't have a record deal. So, we're starting to see that even if your goals are at that high level, we're starting to see independent artists who are reaching those levels of success at those high levels on their own, and we're going to start to see that more and more as time goes on, and we're just kind of at the beginning of this right now.
Yeah, and keeping with that, Ari, given the amount of great information available today for independent artists, what do you see are the main issues that are holding most artists back from having the music career that they want?
Sure. I would say number one, the most the biggest mistake that I see most artists make is that they try to start their careers before they're ready, or they try to push music that is not competitive.
Oh.
They, yes, there is so much information, and because it is so easy to get your song onto Spotify, and Spotify is the same platform that Beyonce's on and you can be on, and everyone can be on the same platform. And so you think, well, because it's so easy to get on there, I deserve to be on there. And that's a huge mistake. Most artists, myself included when I started out, release music before you're ready. Yeah. And, traditionally, that was actually one of the benefits of labels back in the day, is they could develop the artist and they could say, actually, these songs aren't ready. You're not ready. We're not putting these songs out because they're not quite good enough. And artists would say, wow, you're telling me that they're challenging my art. And it's like, okay, yes, maybe on one hand, but on the other hand, maybe you're just not good enough yet. Maybe you need to write 100 more songs.
Right,
and exactly. That's the thing, is a lot of artists don't challenge themselves to become great first. And if any artists with all the information, like I see this all the time, artists come to me and they're like, hey, I've read your book, I followed all your steps, I put my business plan together, it's not working. What's going on? And I'm like, okay, well, let's see your business plan. Let's see what you've been doing. Sure, that all looks right. That looks great. Interesting. Let me check this. Let me look a little bit deeper. And then I listen to the music, or I go see one of their shows, and I'm like, oh, well, I know exactly why people aren't connecting with
they're putting the cart before the horse. Yeah.
They're putting the cart before the horse. Absolutely. And they're just not ready. I use this example. Andy Grammer, he's a pop singer-songwriter.
Right. Yeah.
He, for his second album, he wrote 100 songs just for the second album, before he wrote Honey, I'm Good, which became the hit single off of his second album.
Right.
Now, mind you, this was after he released his first album, which had a couple hits on it. And so he could have very easily been like, well, I'm a hit songwriter, I'm a great songwriter, and I only need to write 10 songs for this next record. But he knew better than that. He had the discipline to write song after song after song after song. He said if he's going to be a pop songwriter, he needs to compete on that pop songwriter level. And so now he writes 100 songs for every album that he puts out. And, had he stopped at song number 50 or 75 or even 95, he wouldn't have a hit on that second record, and he wouldn't have the career that he has today. And so a lot of the younger artists out there, they see the success. They see of their favorite artists, and they see what they put out, and they see what they put out on Spotify and on Instagram, but they don't see behind the scenes of them working and writing 100 songs and shedding it out in the studio and practicing their guitar or their instrument for hundreds of hours, thousands of hours. And that's the work that every artist needs to put in. So if you're a musician and you're wondering, man, why isn't my career going quicker for me? Why aren't things falling into place? I have all the information. It may be because your music is just unfortunately not ready yet. And that's okay. No one comes out of the womb as a master at songwriting or performing or singing or their instrument. You have to work at it. Everyone has to work at it. And so that's the work that needs to be done first and foremost. And then you dig into the business, and then we can talk about the business. And so, with my book, I kind of start at that point where it's like, yes, your music needs to be great first. And now once you have great music, here are all the other things that you can do to now build your career to become a success.
Yeah, it's funny. As I was listening to you, I'm thinking, I've been reading a lot of the press and the interviews with Joaquin Phoenix, who is in the new film The Joker, and he is truly one of the most brilliant actors of our time. And
yes,
he said in an interview, he spoke about this very principle that you were just speaking of and how he learned it. And he said it was his brother River when he was young who taught him, because he said, I was one of those people who gave my career 20 minutes, and when it didn't happen, kind of retreated. And he was talking about when he was young, and he said it was River who really instilled that discipline in me and said, you've got to get back into this, and how he pulled him aside and said, you got to watch this movie. It's called Raging Bull. And and he made him watch it. And then the next day he made him watch it again and take notes, and just about that deep dive about what his own talent was really all about, and about making that commitment. And he talked about that, and it's like that whole philosophy, it shows in so many of his performances, or so many of, a great master's performance, whether it's in literature or in acting or in music, or, you can look at that with any of the great, brilliant artists or masters that you admire. And I will bet you that the quality you're talking about is there. There's a reason for it.
Yes, absolutely. And they put in the work, and we don't see all the acting classes that Joaquin Phoenix went to,
right?
Or all the scene study classes that he did
for years.
That's absolutely. And it's the same with musicians. We don't hear. We haven't heard Andy Grammer's his 90 other songs that never got released, that he threw away for that record because they weren't ready. That's part of the work. And same with writers, novelists. We haven't read all of their other short stories or novels that never came out, that just weren't at that level yet, and that put them on the map. And so there is so much work done behind the scenes that I think a lot of young artists, we are in this fast food society right now, and we want everything right now, immediately. And our attention spans are so short and so small. And, you will not be able to be a successful musician if you don't put in the actual work. And there is a lot more work. You can't write one song and think, man, well, this song is great, let me put it out. And then jump back over into scrolling through Instagram. Some of the best artists, they'll put their phones away. They'll turn their phones off and go on writing retreats for a month.
Yeah.
And they'll go write, every day, all day. Are you willing to do that? Are you willing to actually put in the work of what it's actually going to take? And that's another thing that artists have to think about themselves. Yes, I said earlier, you need the passion, but you also need the work ethic. And if you don't have that work ethic, you're also not going to make it happen for yourself. You need to be self-motivated, and you need to actually have the work ethic that will, in the discipline that will force you to actually level up to a place where you will be competitive and you will stand out.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I remember an interview which stuck with me once that I was watching with Jodie Foster, and they asked her that very question that you just addressed. And the question was, how do you motivate yourself? Because, they talked about the fact that she's had a career since she was a child. And she said, if it's not the most important thing in your life, don't do this. Nope. If you're not passionate, and it's not because she says, I don't think you can be, she personally felt you can't be motivated the way you need to be to have a career like that, unless it is the most important thing. And I never forgot that. And what you were just saying reminded me of that. So
absolutely.
One of the things you point out in your book, and I've heard you talk about this in other conversations, is that the term DIY is really a misnomer, in that no one can do everything by themselves. But you do point out that today there is so much that you can do on your own. And I was wondering, for our audience, can you expand upon this concept?
Yes. Right. Even though Forbes called me the poster child of DIY music, I'll be the first to say that I haven't done anything truly, completely on my own. I've had help with everything, whether it was putting up posters early on around Minneapolis. I had help. I had friends that helped put up posters there, or whether it was creating a website, I had a friend help me do that. Whether it was recording my record, I worked with an engineer and a producer to do that, or making music videos. Sure, I learned how to edit video, but I collaborated and I had somebody shoot the video. A friend came over and they shot the video, and sure, I edited the video, but I needed someone to help me shoot the video and all of that. So yes, there's a lot of things that you can do on your own. And what's really important for musicians is to understand everything that needs to get done, and then understand what their strengths and weaknesses are, and where they're willing to put in the time and the effort, and where they need and want to outsource that what needs to get done, and they can delegate. And so, I know that where my strengths and weaknesses are, and I know one of my weaknesses, or I should say, one of the things that I needed to get done that I didn't want to spend my time doing was recording. And so I am not a great recording engineer. Sure, I have Logic and I have a mic and I can create, some simple demos, but I am not a recording engineer, and I'm not a producer that can create stuff in the box. And so I know that what it would take to create the kind of music at the level that I hold myself to, the quality level, and I can't do that on my own right now without spending thousands of more hours in the studio learning how to do this. And I don't want to do that. And so I know that I can achieve the kinds of recordings that I want by hiring the right kinds of people and working with the right kinds of people. And so there's that is true for every aspect of anything that you want to pursue. And you see what needs to get done. And then you need to make a decision is, okay, with my current skills and my expertise and my knowledge, can I do this on my own, or should I enlist some support and some help? And is it possible for me to enlist some support and some help with this? There's going to be financial limitations, and you have to weigh those. And so early on, yes, I had more time than I had money. So I learned how to do a lot of this stuff on my own, like video editing. I didn't have the money to hire video editors. So I did spend hours and hours and hours and hours learning how to edit video. And that was something that I chose to do. And, it's a great skill to have. I encourage every artist to have just the basic video editing components. Same with graphic design. I'm not a great graphic design artist, but early on, I learned a bit of Photoshop so I could just get basic things done. So I wasn't beholden to a graphic design artist every time that I wanted to make a show flyer. But I know my limitations and my weaknesses are within graphic design. So now that I have a bit more money and less time, I'm going to be hiring graphic design artists because it will bring the project to the level that the quality level that it demands and that I hold myself to. And so, yes, I think every artist, it's important for them to learn and understand what needs to get done, and then figure out what they're going to do on their own, and then what they're going to enlist support to do.
And I think this segues perfectly into the next question, Ari. Talk about time management for artists, and an artist spends their time, how they spend their time. Is this a significant factor for every artist who is building a career?
Sure, absolutely. I have what I call the 50-50 rule, and I encourage every artist, you should spend 50% of your time on the art, on the music and the creation, and 50% of your time on the business side of your music career. Now, this is not every day. This is not like you set an alarm for 2 p.m. and once that hits, it's like, well, time to switch to the business. No. This is kind of the ratio over the course of your entire career. Now, mind you, this is once you start your career. Like we talked about earlier, how you need to become great first. That's the incubation stage. When you're first getting started, when you're in school, when you're learning your instruments, when you're songwriting, when you're just getting started, your career hasn't started yet. And so in the incubation stage, yes, 100% of your time should be spent on the art and the music and learning how to become great and working at your craft. Yes, early on, that's the incubation stage. But once you've decided, okay, my career is starting right now and I am ready to make this thing and ready to go for this, that's when the 50-50 ratio kicks into play. So of course, when you're working on, let's say, an album, and you're writing and you're recording and you're in that process, in that stage, yes, probably 85% of your time is going to be spent on the art and the music and the creation. And as it should, that's what you should be focusing on. But sure, maybe at night you'll send a few emails here and there, you'll pop on socials, or you'll do something, this and that, and maybe do some BTS from the studio. But then when you're ready to release that album, that ratio is gonna flip. And now you're gonna spend 85% of your time on the business and promoting that record. And you're gonna actually need to spend that amount of time. So I encourage everyone to really think about that and make sure it's balanced. And I've seen artists go on both ends and lose that balance. I've lost track of the balance at times, where some artists will spend way too much time on the art and the creation, and they'll make amazing music, and then they only spend a tiny, tiny fraction of their time promoting that music, and they wonder why it's not connecting or reaching an audience. And they wonder why that their career isn't happening, is because they're not spending any time on their career. They just want to make music. And I empathize with that, because yes, every artist just wants to make art. I get it. But unfortunately, if you want to have an actual career and you want to make this into a business, you actually have to put some work into the business. And so, but I also seen on the flip side, I've seen artists that are really good at the business and they spend way too much time on the business and not enough time writing better songs and writing great music and working out their craft and working on their instrument and working on their show. And so it goes both ways. So I encourage everyone to really think about, am I spending 50% of my time over the course of my career, or maybe even the course of this year, on the art, and 50% of the time on the business?
Hey, Insiders, we hope that you've been enjoying our featured interview. Stay tuned, because we've got so much more value coming your way. But before we dive back in, a word from our sponsor. Hey, Ritch, you're the founder, CEO, legend of Music Business Registry. Tell us what the Music Business Registry is all about.
Well, what it's about, Eric, is it's a company that is designed to provide the most accurate and up-to-date contact information for the music business. So if someone is looking to reach the A&R community, if someone is looking to reach music publishers, if someone needs to reach artist managers, if someone needs to reach music attorneys, if someone's looking to place their music into film and television and needs to reach all the music supervisors, that's the contact information that we provide. We've been doing it for 28 years. We're sort of the industry standard, if you will, for the music business, and have been serving them since 1992. So that's what we do.
Amazing. So if I wanted to find out, let's say A&R people from Warner Brothers, let's say, I can just go in there and find that in the A&R registry?
Absolutely. You'll find all of the Warner Brothers in there. You'll find the Warner Brothers in LA, Warner Brothers in New York, Warner Brothers in Nashville, Warner Brothers in London, Warner Brothers, probably in Australia as well. So those are the main territories that we cover.
Amazing. And we're offering all of our insiders right now that are listening, if you visit musicregistry.com and use coupon code MUBUTV10 at checkout, you'll get a 10% discount off your first order. That's musicregistry.com, coupon code MUBUTV10. Anything else you want to say, Ritch?
Well, when you're ready to put your music to work, musicregistry.com. The aspect that we haven't spoken about yet is kind of an element on the creative end that you began to develop with regards to material. And another aspect of that, and again, I've heard you speak about this, and your points are very, very, very important, which is why I want you to address them, which is, how important is it in your mind for an artist to develop a strong personal narrative about themselves as an artist, like story, aesthetic, vibe, sonic and visual, when they're starting out as a recording artist or as an artist in general? I mean, talk about the importance of that, because I think that's especially today, you've pointed out, we have so much music out there. And I think one of the things that isn't said with that is that we have so much music out there without any context.
Yes.
That, that's why when you spoke about that, it really struck a chord with me, is that, you spoke about all of those factors. And I was wondering if you could address that, because I think it's a very important point.
For sure. And once an artist is ready to release a single or an album and really put something into the world, they need to help an audience connect with them. Unfortunately, the music is not enough. You have to guide your audience and guide an audience into and basically tell them what to pay attention to. And it is extremely important for every artist to come up with the story that they want to tell. And it's really, it can't just be, let me tell you my life story, because no one has time for that.
Right.
People need to latch onto the hook. Just like you latch onto a hook in a song in the chorus, you need to latch onto the hook of your story of this artist. Who are you as an artist? What is the one thing that friends are going to tell their other friends when they say, oh, you got to check out this new artist? Oh, yeah? Why? What's the why? What is that one thing that they can say? And I use the example of early on, you got to check out this band. They're incredible. They're a brother-sister duo, and they always wear red and white, and the sister kills it on the drums. They're so badass. You got to check them out. That was the White Stripes. It's like, oh, okay, that's intriguing. That's interesting. It's like, oh, you got to listen to this record. It's so beautiful. Oh, yeah? What about it? Well, this guy went to the northern woods of Wisconsin in a cabin in the wintertime after a breakup, and he wrote this entire album by himself, and it's so beautiful. It's like, oh, wow, that's intriguing. Okay. You listen to it, and it sounds exactly that. Like it was recorded in the northern woods of Wisconsin in the wintertime. This is Bon Iver's first record.
Sure.
Or you can go more of a gimmicky route. It's like, oh, you got this artist, Marshmello. No one knows his identity. No one knows who he is. And he always wears this marshmallow helmet in his head. And it's so fun and it's so crazy, that kind of stuff. Or it's like, oh, listen to the song. Oh, yeah. Why? What's this about? Well, this song is about this 20-year-old female artist getting taken advantage of by Ryan Adams and him going on tour with him, but forcing her to sleep with him for that. It's like, whoa. This song is about that? Who is that? And that's Phoebe Bridgers. And she was very public about that with Ryan Adams. Right. And so it's like you have this story and your stories can evolve. And of course, that's not a lot of these artists, that's not Phoebe's story from day one. She had other stories, but you can evolve your story with a song with every release. You can talk about what the song is about, but you also need to give people guidance on what are you about as an artist? Who are you? What do you stand for? What do you stand against? What are you all about? And there are, every blogger or music journalist that I've ever spoken to, they say, you need to help us with a story. Tell us why we should be listening to this. And no music review is discussing the drum tones or the guitar tones or like the syncopated rhythms in the bridge. Like that's something that musicians get off to. And that's, pay attention to that in studio and make the kind of music you want to make. But that's not interesting to any average fan. They're not going to say, like any average non-musician fan are not going to say, man, you got to really listen to this snare drum tone that they used on this song. Right. It's incredible. They're not going to write about that. And maybe they'll write that in Drummer magazine, but that's about it. And that's only appealing to drummers. But if you want to appeal to non-musician fans, you have to help them out. Tell them why they should pay attention to you. What sets you apart from everyone else? And I know that this is one of the more challenging aspects for an artist, because most musicians come to me like, well, nothing's interesting in my life. There's nothing interesting. I haven't had a tragedy. I don't know. And I'm like, okay, well, let's talk about it, because you don't think anything is interesting in your life. And so we usually sit down and I'll ask them a bunch of questions and about the record, where they came from, their family life, what they do, what their day job is, and really so much. And then you pick out the most interesting aspects of who they are and what they're doing right now as it relates to their music or to this song, because it all does have to connect, and you don't want it to be disjointed. And so, the story that you tell should align with everything else. So for instance, like Bon Iver, like I mentioned before, his album when he first came out with For Emma, the one that was recorded in the northern woods of Wisconsin, it was a very minimal sounding record. The story was very serene, and that the story of the northern woods of Wisconsin, you have that image, and all the images and the aesthetic that was released alongside that album was cohesive. It matched that story. And then his shows also matched that story. And the vibe was consistent across whether you listened to the record or you read the bio or you saw the images or you went to the show. And that's what it needs to be for everyone.
Yeah.
And that's what it needs to be. When you come out with your story, it needs to align with your music. And when someone listens to your music, it should feel the same way that they feel when they visit your Instagram and when they visit your website, or they see your show, or they read an interview, or they read your bio. It's all consistent and all feels the same. It's that same energy. And that's where, this all can sound calculated, but on the flip side, this is how artists are actually, this is how fans are actually going to feel like you are more authentic. This is how you become authentic. It's like we're not necessarily, faking anything. You can. The White Stripes actually were not brother-sister duo. They were ex-husband, ex-wife duo.
Right.
So like you can fake it if you want. It just has to be consistent. It has to be cohesive. And so a lot of artists push back on this concept because like, well, I just want to be authentic and I don't want to manufacture anything. It's like, okay, but authenticity is not interesting. Yes, be authentic, but be authentic with guidance and guidelines. Because if you just show, here's something that's authentic. You go to the gym every morning at 7:30 a.m. and you go on the treadmill, and your treadmill routine is that you're going to spend the first 3.5 minutes on a 7 miles per hour, and then you're going to go the 10 incline, and then you're going to go for the next 5 minutes. You're going to go down to a 3 incline, and then you're going to ramp up to 12 miles an hour, and then you're going to push it down. It's like, yeah, that's truly authentic. Is that interesting? No,
Right,
absolutely not. That is not interesting to anybody. Why would you do that? No one, of course, that sounds absurd. You're not going to share your entire Instagram is not going to be about your treadmill routine unless you're like a fitness coach. And, but like that's authentic, but that's not interesting. So you have to find something that's interesting, that's also authentic, that also relates to the music and to the story that you want to tell. And so, it drives me nuts when I see people, the artists' Instagrams, and like, man, I just can't grow my Instagram. And I take a look at their Instagram and it's like, well, all your posts are inside jokes with your friends. Like,
right.
That's cool and interesting to you and your 7 friends, but like you are excluding anyone who doesn't understand the inside joke, and you're actually insulting them. You're saying, hey, you're not cool enough to understand my joke,
right,
and our joke. And so you're not welcome here.
Right. You're
so
not
if you
part
wanna,
of this crowd.
You're not part of this community, in this crowd. And if you want to be welcomed into this, you got to get to understand our jokes. And so it's kind of, you really need to help out your audience a bit. And you need to show, okay, what am I going to say? And what is my story that is going to be understood? That is something that everyone can latch onto, that's also cohesive and consistent. And I know that sounds incredibly daunting. And in my book, I spent actually in the second edition, I spent a lot of time on this concept because this is something that caught a lot of people up. And one of the reasons that I felt I needed to write the second edition so quickly was that there was some confusion, and I would get messages from people that really struggled with this concept. So I spent a lot of time and a lot of pages in the second edition really helping artists come up with what their story is and how to define their story and their aesthetic and their vibe and how to make it all cohesive and connect to each other.
Yeah, what's so interesting about what you're saying is that we're in an era where, like it or not, and it's sort of backed up with studies that I've read that have been done, is that among huge, music fans, the number one thing that fans want after the music of their favorite artists is access. Yes. And it's, and I think the elements of what you're speaking about are so important to that. There has to be something to connect to. It's not just, and I see what happens where people don't do that, where they don't have that connection, where, it's mainly with older artists who just feel like, there's this barrier between them and their audience, and yes, absolutely, it's a balance, and I think it's a generational divide as well. Like you mentioned, the older artists don't give any access, and they don't show anything, and then the younger artists show too much. And so it's kind of it's definitely a balance, and I think yes, the older artists it would be to their benefit to show a little bit more, but in a way that
makes sense and is going to help their fans connect with them in a way that's meaningful and in a way that makes sense to everybody, both the artist and the fan. And similarly with the younger artists, if you share too much, and it's like, if a new fan, let's say, hears your song on their Discover Weekly, and they tap through and they go to your Spotify profile and they start to listen to more of your music, and they're like, oh, this is really interesting. And then they decide, well, let me read your bio, and they go to your website and they read your bio, and just to kind of get more information on you. And it's 7-page life story about how well, and like, they were picked up the guitar at a young age at 14, and then they joined this band, and then that band broke up, and then they formed this band, and that band broke up, and then their family moved to Connecticut, and then they formed another band, and then that band broke up, but this band went on tour for 3 years, and then that band broke up, and then now they formed this. It's like, that is way too much information. Nobody can latch onto that. That is not interesting to anyone. Sure, that's authentic and that's your bio, but that's not interesting.
Right.
And, before I keep going back to Bon Iver, because he's on top of my mind right now, but, I know Justin Vernon's story that, he cut his teeth playing in 7 different bands growing up around Eau Claire, Wisconsin, and he come play Minneapolis, and I was in the Minneapolis scene, so I saw him there. And it's like, that wasn't the story that was told when Bon Iver came out. It wasn't that Justin Vernon, he played in all these different bands, in this rock band and that rock band, and he was a singer of this and the drummer of that one and the guitar player of this. It's like, that's too much information when someone is just dipping their toes into your project. When someone is just dipping their toes into your project, or a journalist is going to write about you, that's why they want press releases. They don't want your 7-page life story.
Right.
The press release outlines the most interesting, vital aspects of your project and of this record or the tour or whatever you're promoting for them to write about. They need something to write about, and they only have a limited amount of space and a limited amount of time to learn about you. They don't have time to learn your entire life story. But if you help them and you guide them and say, hey, pay attention to this part about this right now. This is the story that I want to tell, and this is compelling. This is interesting. This is going to be interesting to your readers. They're going to have fun reading this because it's compelling. And that's what every artist really needs to focus on.
Precisely.
Ari, so many young artists today, and managers and labels too, think that getting on playlist is the most essential element for any artist to reach an audience.
Yes.
What is the biggest myth around playlists?
Sure. So, the biggest myth around playlists is that the only way to be successful on Spotify is to get on playlists. That's a myth. That's not accurate. I've seen artists become extremely successful on Spotify without playlists.
Right.
I'm going to use my friend Lucidius. He's a hip hop artist as an example. He has over 500,000 monthly listeners. He has over 100 million total streams. He's getting 5 million streams a month. He's making $20,000 a month just from streaming revenue. Yeah. And
I believe you guys put a course together, correct?
Yep, absolutely. Yeah. We teach artists how to do this because he's not on any playlists. He doesn't have a record label, and he doesn't even have a manager. And he figured out how to do this on his own. And and I see this with other artists as well, who are not on playlists, and they're getting hundreds of thousands of monthly listeners and millions of streams because they've built up a real fan base, believe it or not. And it's not about just the playlist success, because yes, the quickest way to get a whole bunch of streams in a very short amount of time is to get on playlists. That's true. Absolutely. And if you get on some playlists, that's awesome. And if you get on big playlists, you'll get a bunch of streams. But guess what? Those are not fans. Just because you get a bunch of streams doesn't mean you get a bunch of fans. If someone hears your song on a playlist, who knows if they even liked it? Sure, you got the stream. Maybe they're a fan of the playlist. But they're not a fan of you. And that's the thing, is just like on pop radio, people are fans of pop radio, and they don't even know half the time the artists who are the songs that they dig on the pop radio station. It's the same thing with playlists. Yeah. Now it's just a bit more fragmented, and it's separated by kind of people's interests in niches and genres and vibes. But it's the same concept. People are fans of playlists now, and they're not necessarily translating to be fans of the artists. And so there's very much tons, unfortunately, thousands of artists who, they have very great streaming success, which is awesome, and they're making decent revenue doing this. Fantastic. However, they don't have any fans, and they can't draw 50 people to their local shows. And I have seen this happen where an artist gets a song on a really hot playlist or a bunch of hot playlists, and they start making really good revenue. They make thousands of dollars a month from the streaming revenue, and they quit their day job only to get dropped from those playlists 3 months later. Their streams fall back down to virtually zero because they have no fans. They have no real listeners, no real fans. And now they have to go beg for their day job back. And so I've seen that as well. Playlists, the music industry had become obsessed with playlists over the last few years, and they lost track of what is the true goal of what we're trying to do here. And it's not to get on playlists. That's not the true goal. The true goal is to get fans and to have fans support you for life and to have a successful music career for life. And sure, playlists can help with getting a bit of money early on and maybe get some extra exposure. Absolutely. But never lose track of your ultimate goal, and that's to get fans. And oftentimes getting on playlists is not really necessarily the best way of gaining fans. It's the best way of getting a bunch of streams really, really quickly. But never lose track of that.
I completely agree with you.
Yeah, and I was going to ask you with that rapper, because I've done a little history with him. How long did it take him to kind of develop this? Because I know it wasn't an overnight thing with him developing the thing on Spotify.
Yeah, sure. A lot of trial and error early on. He used this. He utilized direct marketing, so Facebook ads initially.
Ads, digital marketing.
Yep, and then it evolved into Instagram ads, and when Instagram became popular and released an ad platform, and it continues to evolve it as new features are enabled and technology evolves. But it was probably 3 years, he told me, from when he had less than kind of 1,000 likes or followers on any platform and making under $100 a month. It was 3 years to him to grow to where he's at now, which is 150,000 Instagram followers, 250,000 Facebook likes, 60,000 Spotify followers, 500,000 monthly listeners, and $20,000 a month. That was 3 years of basically growing it and trial and error and investing. But that's the thing that catches a lot of artists up, is a lot of artists are afraid to invest their money.
Right.
And this is something, I mentioned the 50-50 rule before, which was time, spending half your time on the art and the creation and half your time on the business. The 50-50 rule also applies to your money. You need to spend half of your money on the creation of that art. Sure, studio costs, recording equipment, all of that. But then you also need to spend 50% of your money on the promotion and the marketing. And if you don't have any money left over to market your music, then it's not going to reach an audience, unfortunately. There's just too much music out there, and you need to give it a little boost. And yes, even if it's great, it's still not going to find an audience unless you give it some help. And so artists all the time will run, they'll budget out their record and say, okay, it's going to cost me $10,000 to make this album. So they run a Kickstarter for $10,000. And then when their record comes out,
they forgot to run the other $10,000 for the marketing.
Right. They have $27 left over to market their record. And they wonder why it doesn't succeed. And they wonder why it doesn't reach anybody. And that's because they have no money left to market it. And so you need to spend at least 50% of your money marketing it. And any label or any successful artist that does this on their own will tell you actually they're spending a lot more than that. But I like to make that 50-50 rule early on for artists, just to give them a starting point and a mindset shift, because most artists will spend 95% of their money on their art and the creation of that art and studio costs and everything. And then they only have a tiny fraction left over for marketing.
Right. And I think there's a big stigma out there with the artists that they feel like what you were just saying, they don't need to put in money in their career. They think it needs to be all handed to them. And it's such a huge mistake that people don't realize. And I'm wondering if you can elaborate on that, because that's like a big issue I see with a lot of artists.
Well, yeah, and they'll learn that the hard way.
Yeah.
I mean, if they don't want to listen to the experts out there, and they don't want to listen to everyone that's going to tell them, like, yeah, if you want to have a career, you need to invest in it. I mean, look at any small business or any entrepreneur. Any small business and entrepreneur, they invest in their business and they lose a lot of money early on.
Right.
Most companies, especially in Silicon Valley, are not profitable for the first few years.
Right.
They're developing their business. And so I think artists need to understand that we are entrepreneurs. We are small businesses. Every musician is a small business and is an entrepreneur. And so you need to invest money if you want to have a business, just like every small business in the world and every entrepreneur invests in their business and invests in their career. You need to invest in your career as well. And it's where to invest. That's where the research, that's where the research comes in.
Yeah,
exactly. And it's like not just invest in better
where to
gear.
spend your money in and where to spend it in the right places.
Exactly. I mean, artists will like to geek out and be like, man, I just bought this $8,000 microphone. I'm like, okay, but I guarantee if you do a A/B test with this $8,000 mic and a $400 mic, 9 out of 10 artists are not going to be able to tell the difference.
Exactly.
So it's kind of like, was that really the best use of your money right now? When you only have $8,500 to your name, you just decided to spend $8,000 on a microphone? Like, come on now. Let's get a little smart here. And like, let's really think about that 50-50 rule. If you have $8,000 to spend on a microphone, you better have $8,000 to spend on marketing for your record. And so it's like, yes, you need to invest in gear and equipment and all of that stuff. Absolutely, that helps with the creation of that art. But you also need to invest in the marketing and the promotion of that art as well if you want it to reach any kind of an audience.
For new artists today, just going along this idea of the marketing, because one element that we haven't talked about with the marketing is that for new artists today, what needs to be in place, Ari, before an artist plans a tour?
Well, it depends on the kind of tour they're looking to plan. So if this is a tour where they're headlining and they are needing to sell tickets and it's a tour where they need to bring an audience, then a fan base needs to be in place before they tour, or at least a plan on how they're going to get people out to every one of their shows on that tour. And you can get creative with this, but if you don't have a plan on how you are going to bring people to your shows, you're not going to have a successful tour. Now, there are ways to tour without a fan base. You can set up a house concert tour where it's based on the host bringing people, and that's fine.
Right.
You can set up a college tour where colleges, they have a built-in audience and they'll pay you to come play, and you don't need to have a fan base for that. You can get on an opening tour if you're friends with the artist and they don't need the tour buffer and they don't need the opening support in terms of numbers, and maybe they're playing venues where they can sell them all out on their own as a headliner, and so then you can open that tour maybe. So there are you really need to look at, if you're going to go on tour, what is the purpose of this tour? And the purpose of most tours should really be to connect with your audience and to bring your show to your fans. And if you don't have any fans, you may not be ready at the point where you should be touring yet, because kind of touring to build a fan base, that is not as efficient as it used to be. That used to be the way to do it. And,
right.
And I'll be the first to tell you that's how I did it, early
right.
on. Like
a different era. Yeah. It's
a different era. Like, yeah, I did that 10 years ago when the internet was in its infancy in terms of the platforms, the artist fan platforms. Like, those were just kind of getting started. And I toured to build a fan base, and I did it, and that was a slow grow. It's like the first time you play this venue, 25 people come, and then it's 50, and then it's it's like that kind of a thing. But there are more efficient ways to build an audience online right now, and then you can bring that show to an audience. However, I'll be the first to say I love performing shows. I love touring, and I want to connect with a live audience, and so I don't want to spend all my time in my bedroom developing on the internet, and that's totally okay. And so there are ways to set up successful tours without a large fan base, but you really have to get creative about it. And I'll give you one small example of kind of how I did it on one of my tours. This was a few years back. I want to say this is maybe 2011 or so, 2012. I wanted to go on a tour to visit cities that I'd never been to before, and I had no audience and no fan base there. And this is before the era of Spotify or I didn't have a YouTube audience at this time. I didn't really have much of an internet fan base. I had a live audience, but I wanted to visit all these cities. So I booked a tour for 20 different cities, and in each city I booked an all ages venue on a Saturday night. And then I hit up the local high schools in town and said, hey, I'm going to be coming to town this week. I'd love to come and talk to your students about what it's like to be a touring musician. I'll play some songs, I can answer questions, and I can talk about what it's like to be a musician and how a formal music education kind of helped me get to where I am. And just let me promote my show on Saturday and let me sell some merch. And all the music teachers were like, wow, this is amazing. Absolutely.
And they agreed. They agreed.
Okay. Absolutely. So I spent each week. So it was 20 cities, 20 different weeks. And I spent the week in the city, going into local high schools. And sometimes a school would hold a full school-wide assembly for me. Other schools, I would literally set up in the band room, and I would just be there for period after period after period. And it was exhausting, but I'd do 7 periods in a row. Other schools, I set up in the auditorium, and all the music classes, they brought all the music classes to me, band, choir, orchestra, any other kind of music classes that they had. They would bring them to the auditorium, and I would give my presentation, which I'd play a couple songs, and I would talk about music, and then I'd sell merch. And I sold a ton of merch, so much merch at each of these schools. Believe it or not, high school kids had money. Maybe I took their lunch money. I don't know, but they had money, and they bought my merch, and I made enough money on those merch sales that it funded that entire week of me staying in the city and that tour. And then I promised all the clubs, the reason that the clubs where I had no history in the market gave me a shot. I had no numbers to say online, and I had no history in the market, but I convinced them to give it to me because I told them I'm going to bring at least 50 people out to this show, and here's how I'm going to do it. And they trusted me because I laid out my promotional plan. They thought it was really interesting. They all gave me the club. Some gave me the early slot. They're like, all right, you can have 6 to 9 o'clock, but we need to do a late show that night. I'm like, that's fine. And I did it. And in every city, I brought 50 to 350 people.
Wow.
And it was mostly high school kids. And that's how I kind of started my audience and that fan base in those markets. And this is, you can get creative, but this is also understanding my strengths because
right. And your ability to present to high school students.
Exactly.
Because you're a great speaker and you're very engaging. I mean, to audiences. I mean, I've seen you at South by Southwest. I've seen you at the ASCAP thing. You're very engaging. And so that's an art. And it goes to the point you're making, which is, what your strengths are to fulfill on that promotional engagement.
Thank you. And absolutely. So those are my strengths. And every artist, most artists wouldn't be able to do that kind of a tour and wouldn't be able to set that up because they wouldn't feel comfortable speaking in front of high school kids or talking about themselves in that way and sharing that kind of information. And that's okay. Every artist needs to evaluate, where their strengths are and where their communities are. You can get creative and you can tap into other communities in every city you go to. So there are creative ways to make a tour successful, even if you don't have a large fan base online that you can help look at the numbers and to tell you where you should be touring and where your fans exist. But it just takes a lot more work in kind of coming up with creative ways that you're going to draw a crowd.
I want to ask you one more question on the touring element. You mentioned colleges.
Yes.
In earlier. Can you talk about NACA, and does that have any relevance to people joining? Should they join that organization?
Short answer is no. You should not join that organization as an independent artist. I've showcased at 7 NACA conferences over the years, and here's why I'll tell you this: you should not be joining this. I've played over 100 college shows in my career, official university sanctioned shows where I was brought to campus to entertain their students. This was not because I had the fan base on campus. This was literally I was hired to entertain their students for maybe, and it pays really well. It's like $1,500. Plus, they covered all my travel, lodging, expenses, all of that stuff. I played for 75 minutes of original music. It's a dream gig. And I had no fan base there, but the whole school showed up oftentimes, or sometimes I played for, in the cafeteria at lunch because that is like a commuter school or something. So there are all different kinds of shows that I played. Some were glamorous, some were not glamorous at all, but you still got paid a lot of money. And so once artists hear that, it's like, whoa, I can make $1,500 for playing 75 minutes of original music and I don't need a fan base? Like, that's incredible. And then they hear NACA thrown around. They're like, oh, NACA's the key to this? Sweet. Well, and then they join NACA and they shell out all of this money to go to the conferences, and they buy the booth fee, and they have to buy the membership. And, in the end, if you want to go at colleges on your own and you want to try to pursue the college entertainment market via NACA, it's going to be extremely expensive. It'll cost you maybe $2,000 to kind of go at this on your own year one for just one conference. Wow. And that's a money that most artists don't have. And not to mention, when you get to that conference, you're going to be lost. You have no idea how this works. If you decide you can't just show up at NACA, you have to become a member of NACA, which costs a lot of money. Then you can't just show up. You have to have a booth, which costs a lot of money. It's also not valuable unless you're showcasing.
Right.
And it's extremely difficult to get a showcase at NACA. It's highly competitive. And if you don't know what kinds of how to submit for that showcase, you're not going to get a showcase. And their tactics. Like, I've mastered this, and so I teach a course on this, on how to break into the college entertainment market, because I've cracked the code. There is a code for this, and obviously I've cracked it because I've showcased at so many conferences and played so many shows. But I've been to all these conferences, and after my showcase, I'm flooded by people in the marketplace, in the conference hall, at my booth, where I'm signing autographs and taking pictures, and people are booking me left and right. And I look to my left, and there's a booth right next to us of an independent artist, and no one is talking to them. They can't, to save their life, get anybody to come into their booth and listen to the music or even attempt to book them. And it breaks my heart. I'm like, man, I just wish you knew. I wish you didn't waste your money in going to NACA here, because this is not the way to do it. And you have to be experienced and understand how to do it. So have I ever paid for a NACA membership? No. How have I showcased at NACA? Yeah. And how have I done this? And and have I ever paid for a booth fee? Never. Well, how did you do this? Well, I got a college booking agent. And a college booking agent is very different from a club and festival booking agent. I've never had a club or festival booking agent. I've booked all the club and festival shows on my own. But colleges is a completely different world and a completely different beast. And I do not advise anybody to go at colleges on their own without a college booking agent. But also don't now I can just hear the people listening to this on the other end sprinting to Google college booking agent contact information. Right. Let me just don't do that either. Because you only get one shot at a first impression. And if your first impression is nothing about the college industry, and you just hit up agents, be like, hey, I'm amazing, please represent me, they're going to delete your email and blacklist you. Don't do that. Right. You have to understand and be respectful of their time, and understand that this is a completely different world, and it's a completely different industry, and there's etiquette. And the etiquette is in the college music industry is paramount. And you have to understand how the industry operates. And so actually I have an entire chapter in my book about the college entertainment industry, because it is such a different world. Yes, it can be incredibly lucrative. And yes, it makes sense for a lot of artists, but it also does not make sense for a lot of artists. And so if you think that you want to make a go at it in the college entertainment market, cool, but go about it right. And I encourage you to read that chapter in the book, or at least sit down with someone who has mastered the college industry and has played tons of shows in college, and at least understand how that works.
Okay.
Absolutely. Ari, we talked about this a couple of questions earlier, and, I've heard you discuss the concept of direct marketing for new artists, like I said, which we covered just a little bit ago on the Spotify question. Can you discuss this more in depth and kind of give us a little overview for the audience that doesn't know about direct marketing?
Sure. So direct marketing is simply spending some money to find your fans and to welcome them into your world, and to reach an audience through paid advertising is kind of what that looks like now. And more specifically, It is basically using what's most effective these days are Facebook and Instagram ads. And now the Facebook Business Manager advertising platform is incredibly robust, and it can be quite complicated. However, Facebook has made it very easy for you to pay them money, and so they have made it incredibly easy if you just skim the surface. So that's where you see that boost post. And artists are like, wow, this is really easy. If I click the boost button and I spend $10, I'm going to get 500 likes. Wow, that was easy. But did that really do anything for you? Did you actually get any new fans? Did that really do anything? So it's like, right. And oftentimes the answer is no when it comes to that. And so then artists try that, like, man, I spent a lot of money on Facebook advertising. It did nothing for me. It's like, yeah, because you didn't do it in the correct way.
Right.
So it doesn't mean that Facebook advertising doesn't work. It just means you don't know how to do it. And so it's so incredibly robust and complicated of a platform, the Business Manager and the advertising, that you really need to master it to be effective at it. And so there are marketing agencies you could hire if you have more money than time. And if you have more time than money, you can learn how to do this. And I teach a course. Yes, I teamed up with Lucidius, who mastered this stuff. And we teach musicians and managers how to use direct marketing, how to use Facebook and Instagram advertising effectively to reach their audience, to find an audience, and then to actually get them not just to engage with you on that platform, but actually to stream your music and to become fans with you. And so, but this stuff evolves. I stay up on this. I listen to marketing podcasts, and I keep up and read the marketing blogs and keep up with all the changes on Facebook and Instagram advertising, because it does evolve and shift every day. And so if you really want to put your efforts into learning how to market, you really do have to stay up on this stuff, because it shifts so quickly and it evolves so quickly. Like, for instance, Instagram story ads are very valuable and effective, I should say, right now. But a year ago, were they? No. Why? Because it didn't exist a year ago. And so that's like, what's gonna be the most effective in a year from now? I have no idea, but I'll tell you in a year from now. And so you kind of have to stay up on that if you want to utilize direct marketing as part of your promotional strategy.
As part of that too, Ari, do you feel that consistent engagement is an important factor in developing a relationship with your audience today as a music artist, so that you're sort of, I guess, staying, on top of mind with them?
Well, that's an interesting question, because I would say consistency in the right way.
Right.
And I would say every platform demands a different etiquette and a different level of consistency. And that etiquette also demands what consistency actually means. Like, for instance, you can tweet 7 times a day, and that is totally appropriate etiquette on Twitter, and that's consistency, and that's okay. Now, obviously, you're not going to release 7 songs a day,
right?
And so, like, that sounds absurd, but you really have to understand the etiquette of the platform. And the etiquette of Spotify is you don't release 7 songs a day. Maybe you release a song a month. And that's consistency, and that's cool. YouTube, you're not going to release 7 videos a day. Whereas, like, sure, you can post 7 stories on Instagram story, and that's totally appropriate, and that is appropriate etiquette on Instagram stories. 7 stories a day, no problem. They disappear in 24 hours, absolutely. But you're not going to release 7 videos on YouTube a day. So even though it's the same kind of they're both videos, you have to understand the etiquette of the platform and where it's going to be most effective and welcomed into that platform. So yes, consistency is can be effective. And for instance, with live streaming, the keys to live streaming, every artist that I've spoken to who has been successful on live streaming platforms, whether it's been Periscope or YouNow or Facebook Live, or Twitch, the keys that I've heard from them, how they've become successful, is consistency. They go live pretty much every single day. And that is what people and fans of the platform expect. And that's how you build that audience on that platform. But I've spoken to a successful Instagram musician, and she doesn't post every day on Instagram. She'll post maybe every few weeks, believe it or not. And that is what has worked for her. Now she'll post a few more stories more consistently to give a little behind the scenes. And there's ways to kind of engage with your audience in more effective ways than just posting every single day. So I think it's important to understand who your audience is, where they exist, what platform is going to be the most effective way to engage with them, because that's where they have fun engaging with you. That is going to be based on age and location and all of that stuff, and then also understanding how they're going to interact with you in the way that makes sense with them, and what consistency looks like in that respect. So consistency as just an overall theme, yes, I think it's consistency absolutely is important, and you should be consistent. But when you break that down of what does that actually mean, it varies based on platform
and the cadence as well too.
Absolutely.
Yes, Ari, last year you launched Ari's Take Academy. What's the company's mission with that?
Well, the company's mission with just Ari's Take in general, my music business education company, is to empower musicians to succeed with music careers in the new music business. And so everything that I do, that is the mission, is to empower and educate artists to have successful music careers. And so all the educational resources that I have released, they've evolved over the years. So I started with just a blog. It just started with aristake.com, the blog, and I would just write short little bits of information and advice columns there. Then that evolved into the book, and then which was more long form because that was what people were asking for. And they're saying, I need something to help me piece the dots together. And then after they read the book, they're like, I'm looking for a little bit more hands-on guidance, and I would like to go deeper on some of these concepts. And I really want to be stepped, a little bit further into what you're talking about in these concepts. And so that's why I decided to launch Ari's Take Academy, which is, I tackle some of these topics like booking and touring or direct marketing or the college market, and I go real deep with them. And so there's a ton of lessons. And, it's very hands-on. There's a community that's built within each course, and you have access to me and other instructors and our course moderators and TAs, and you engage and interact with fellow students. And so it's very interactive, and it's very hands-on, and it's very supportive. And so I'm always looking for ways to help empower artists and to help educate and share the knowledge in ways that are going to be most effective. And so I found that this model of education, which it's an online school right now, it's just online. This can be very effective at reaching artists from all over the world and helping them really grow their music careers with much more hands-on attention. And it's proven that they've a lot of artists really have appreciated this, and it's really helped their careers, because sometimes maybe you're not in a music hub, maybe you don't have access to industry, or you don't have access to other people who you're a community necessarily. Like some people, I had a student who was like in the middle of nowhere, Ireland. He's like, there is no music community here, but you are my music community now, and everyone in the course. And so he pops into the group that we have and discussions, and now he's surrounded by all these like-minded musicians. And sure, they're not close to him in proximity and location, but he feels that connection with these other artists, and they encourage him to continue and support him that way. And I've now, Ari's Take Academy has just over 1,000 students right now from all over the world, of people that are really working on their music careers together.
Wow. That's really incredible, and I commend you for that, because that's the future. Ari, I want to ask you a personal, professional question, which is, professionally speaking, what have your biggest mistakes taught you in your career?
Sure. I would say, kind of like I was touching on a little bit earlier, my biggest mistake professionally was I started my music career before I was ready. I released music before I was ready. I listened back to my first album that I put out, and it's not very good. I had 12 songs on that album. Why did I have 12 songs on that album? Because those are the only 12 songs I had written at the time. So, those are some of the lessons that I learned the hard way. And it took me a few years trying to figure out, why aren't people connecting, and why is my music career growing quicker, as quickly as I think it should be. I think I'm doing all the business things correctly, and it's just not growing very fast. And it was because my music wasn't ready. And so I learned that the hard way. And I would say that was probably the biggest mistake in my career early on. And so that's a constant, that's a constant thing that I try to challenge myself to become better and better. And I'm always trying to write better songs. Every song I write, I try to make it better than the last song I wrote. Am I ever going to write like John Lennon? No, but I'm going to write like me, and I'm going to try to make a better song than the one I wrote yesterday. And so, I think that's, as an artist, we're always trying to create better and more authentic and more meaningful art that connects with an audience in a deep, meaningful, spiritual way. And so that's something that I'm always working on. But that was, one of probably my biggest mistake early on.
Ari, besides your great book, How to Make It in the New Music Business, are there any other books or films that have really resonated with you, creatively speaking, that you could recommend to our audience? Sure.
If we start with books, I recommend Amanda Palmer's book, The Art of Asking. I love her philosophy. I also recommend Derek Sivers' book, Anything You Want. These are two of my biggest influences in terms of philosophical influences. I would definitely read both of those. Both are very easy reads. In terms of films, I love the movie Whiplash. If you remember the movie Whiplash from a few years ago. Yeah, I love that. And that kind of really illustrates the challenge and the battle and the struggle that so many artists go through at striving for greatness. And really, the battle that a lot of young musicians have with their family, and trying to explain to them what they're doing in music and why they have to do music and pursue a music career. Most families don't really get that and understand. So I love that movie. The Quincy Jones documentary was actually really phenomenal. I recommend everybody watch that. I loved Sonic Highways, the Foo Fighters HBO docuseries that they did about each of their
cities.
Their new the cities that they went to record each song in a different city, and then they went through each city's musical history. And so I thought that was really inspiring, and I thought it was just a brilliant way to create an album and then release the album and talk about an interesting story around an album. It's like, they didn't have to do that. They're the Foo Fighters. But that was something that everyone talked about, and them got super creative on releasing that. I'd start there.
Okay, I love that too, and I also think on, just going on what you had spoken about earlier in our conversation today is, by doing it that way and by giving the time, energy, commitment, and focus, even though they are the Foo Fighters, they reached an audience with that documentary that went way beyond just the Foo Fighters fan base.
Oh, absolutely.
And brought attention to that.
Right. It expanded their fan base because of the story, because of what they were doing, and everything that was also around the record. And so I thought it was brilliant.
Absolutely. Ari, what advice can you offer for artists and bands and other creatives who are pursuing a career in music today?
I would say the biggest, most important thing that every artist can do right now, no matter what stage of your career you're at, is to set up goals. Create goals. Create a 6-month goals, create 1-year goals, create 5-year goals. Because if you don't have goals, you don't know what you're working towards. And oftentimes, because there are so many different ways to pursue a music career today, and there's so many different avenues and so many different influences and inspiration out there in terms of artists who are succeeding in creative, interesting ways. If you don't actually set up goals, you're going to try to do everything all at once and you're going to fail at everything. So I encourage every artist to set up their 6-month goals, and these goals need to be concrete goals, not something ethereal like I want to be a full-time musician. Sure. But concrete goals. I want to sell out this 500 cap venue in 6 months. That's a concrete goal. I want to get a song placed on a TV show in a year. That's a concrete goal that then once you set up that goal, you can reverse engineer that and figure out how to achieve that goal. And then you work every day on achieving that goal. And so the most important thing that anyone can do is set up your goals and write them down and hold yourself accountable to those goals.
Yeah, it's when you were speaking just now, I remember a life coach once who I never forgot named Brett Costin talking about this very principle when somebody asked him that question. And he said, it's kind of like the difference in life between fantasies and dreams. And he said the difference between fantasies and dreams are that fantasies are just that. They're just fantasies. They're not things that any of us ever take, action toward, like I'm going to go out with Angelina Jolie or I'm going to date Brad Pitt or whatever it is. That's a fantasy. But a dream is something that has actual tangible goals. Like you said, actual tangible steps that you can take step by step by step. Like these are the steps that I'm going to do to get my music into a TV show in 1 year. These are the relationships I'm going to develop with whoever in order to achieve that. And I just thought, it's getting you to, concretize. And that's one thing that I think goals really have the ability to do, as opposed to something ethereal or fantasy like, which is just pie in the sky. But there's no sort of apparatus to achieve a fantasy. It just sort of stays in your own, head as that. But dreams and goals really have concrete, tangible steps that are actionable.
Absolutely. I love that. Absolutely.
Ari, what are the best ways for people to reach you who may be interested in working with you or in taking one of your courses?
Sure. Well, the school is Ari's Take Academy. That's just aristakeacademy.com. So you can find the courses there. I encourage everyone to sign up on my email list. That's just at aristake.com. Because that's where I send out all the information, all new blog posts, anything I'm learning, new information about everything is on the email list. And then if you want to just send me a quick message, easiest way to do that is through Instagram. You can find me on Instagram at Ari Herstand, and you can shoot me a DM. Tag me in your stuff, shoot me a story, whatever, that way as well.
Ari, we cannot thank you enough for taking the time to doing this. I really appreciate it. We both do immensely. So it's been extremely informative, inspiring, and we're both very grateful for you for doing it.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me. This is a lot of fun.
Thank you. Wonderful, wonderful advice. Yeah. Wonderful interview. I have always loved Ari. He is the real deal, ladies and gentlemen. He really is. I mean, I admire not only what he's done, but I admire him as a person. This is a man of real integrity. And I say that because, right, if you recall, like right at the top of the interview, Eric, when he spoke about, he doesn't believe in competition.
Right.
He doesn't see the world in terms of scarcity.
Exactly.
And if I give you, that's going to leave me with nothing.
Right. And he feels stronger as a music community together as a whole.
And it's so interesting because the world that we live in today, in terms of artists and music and independent, is confirming that.
Right.
The growth of the independent music community is enormous.
It's exploded. And
I think
that was the inspiration behind the book, was that he was, hearing these stories of people that were continuing to take advantage of deals that were not favorable to the artist. And, artists didn't know how to make their careers happen, so they were giving up. And then years later, finding out about Ari and telling them, listen, I want to restart my career. How do I go about doing this? So.
Exactly. And that, is something, as he was speaking about that, Eric, it was so interesting because I kept thinking, these are people that obviously at the time they weren't educated enough about their own career. And this is our whole thing, is that you have to be, if music is to be your career, if the stock market is to be your career. You have to be educated about that. You have to do a deep dive.
Yeah.
And music, especially today for the independent artist, is no exception to that.
Right.
And
especially with all the changes that are happening, you have to be keeping up with what's going on.
And continue to happen at a more rapid pace than ever before.
Yeah. When it came to about the question, what artists need to be asking themselves before pursuing a career in the music industry, I thought this was a interesting, which is because it's a big topic that you and I have discussed, personally and on the show on previous episodes. Where do you see yourself doing anything else in your life aside from this?
Exactly.
Like, this has got to be such a commitment. You have to be willing to die for this, beg, borrow, and steal, obviously not in the literal sense, but, where this has to be the only thing in your life that you're committed to.
Absolutely. And I have always believed that. I mean, all the successes that I've seen in music in my own career, not necessarily with me, but that I've seen in my career with artists, are always because people lived this as a way of life.
Yeah.
This isn't the kind of job that you can do, for a year or two, and if it doesn't work out, well, I'll go drive a truck.
Right.
I mean, then you should drive a truck because that's probably more, would make you more secure.
Exactly.
If you're not committed to this as a way of life, and he spoke about that, like what you said, if your soul, isn't demanding that
right.
music be your life.
He said absolute passion, which is obviously the things that you hear about with the most successful artists in the world.
And you know why that's so important? Because of what you're talking about, because of the difficulty, because of the length of time that one needs to be committed. It's like that famous Goethe quote, before there is commitment, there is hesitation.
Right.
Once there is commitment, providence
exactly
moves. The universe
right.
moves to accommodate you. And
right.
it may not move in 20 minutes,
right.
but it moves to accommodate what you're saying. In other words, it's like that's the destination. That's the vision that you have.
And it's a lifelong journey. And if you're not prepared to take that, you're going to have a short career. And if you're it's got to be something that you're not willing to give up, even after, like what he said, the 100 rejections. And I know that personally, intimately, I know that journey and that roller coaster ride that we ride as independent artists, or just as artists in general. It's a freaking roller coaster ride.
And not only from the business, but from the internet and from,
exactly.
and he, talked about how even successful people get that.
Right.
Not everybody loves Madonna. Not everybody loves, whoever.
Exactly.
It's not just because you're successful that you're going to stop that.
Yeah. I also thought, when we asked about, why does an artist, need to have a personal definition of success, this is another really crucial one. And maybe you can elaborate a little bit on.
Absolutely. I thought that was a really, really interesting. And what made it so interesting is that there's a deeply spiritual and philosophical reason for it, but there's also, which I loved about his answer, there's also a very practical, real reason for that today.
Yeah.
In the past, with the old businesses, Ari pointed out, the definition of success was very, very, very clear and linear.
Millions of sales,
Exactly.
Platinum
and if you
sales,
had big
right.
platinum record, you were successful. You went out on tour, that was it.
Right.
Today, there's so many ways to have a music career that don't involve that. We could do an entire show, and it might be interesting, for the future, to do an entire show on people who are making very, very good livings who no one has ever heard of.
Right. Well, that's one of the big things that we're trying to accomplish.
Absolutely.
With this.
And that's going on.
To uncrack that nut and to realize that no one can define success for you, which is exactly what Ari said during the interview.
You have to define it for yourself. And I loved when he talked about, maybe your idea of success is earning $35,000-$40,000 a year,
right. doing wedding
gigs and
wine bars
and
right.
playing,
or live streaming from a bedroom on the other end of the spectrum, where you're making, God knows how much money. Some of these artists are pulling in thousands of dollars in each of these.
Who have built an audience. They've taken years to build an audience.
And they don't want to necessarily tour, so they're doing it from their home, and it's working for them. They've achieved an audience. And I think the real point here is that there's no right or wrong answer in this. It's just what it is for you personally.
Exactly. There isn't a right or wrong. And this is why I think every artist needs to define that. Some people, it's just about playing live. Some people, it's just, and you have audiences that, even to this day, support acts on a live setting, but they haven't made records or had a record on the radio or on
right.
streaming in decades.
Right.
But they're still able to go out and make a living.
Right.
Okay? And that's a very important thing. I think with relation to, this is why you need to really give a lot of consideration. The music business isn't one-dimensional today as far as a career. It's not like you do this, and this. No. It depends what kind of career you want.
Exactly. And this is another point, the final point in summarizing this interview, which was, just really great on many levels, was, the myth that we don't need to put any money into our music career. And I'm here to tell you guys, just me as an artist myself, you absolutely have to invest. And I thought Ari hit the nail on the head where, we are entrepreneurs of our own business. It just happens to be that we are the brand and we are the business. And I'm here to tell you, if you're not prepared to invest money like any other company does, whether it's Silicon Valley or, wherever it may be at, you're not going to have a long career in this. You have to invest. The key, I think, is investing in the right type of things that are going to move the needle for you.
I totally agree. And I think it goes back to the point that we were talking about in the earlier part of the interview when he was speaking about the questions you need to ask yourself.
Right.
To me, Eric, that's one of them that every artist, or singer or band needs to ask themselves, how much are we or how much am I willing to invest in my career? Because let me tell you something, ladies and gentlemen, if you're not willing to invest in yourself, why the hell should anyone else?
Exactly.
And you just spoke about that, like the long-term investment that you need to make over periods of time. Really, really important. And, the thing is, why it's important is because you won't necessarily always see the return in an immediate way.
Hey Insiders, thanks so much for tuning into this episode. We really appreciate it. To get show notes, links, and everything that was mentioned during this interview, head on over to our official website at MUBUTV.com/podcast/show notes. If you're enjoying the content and what we're doing here on the show, please subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcast, Stitcher, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts from. And don't forget to rate and review our show over at iTunes. 5-star reviews are always welcome and help to ensure that our podcast stands out on the top rated and new and noteworthy charts on iTunes in our space. You can also find us on social media at Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, all ending with the handle MUBUTV, which is spelled MUBUTV. Don't forget to catch our flagship show, the MUBUTV Insider Video Series, airing every week on YouTube at youtube.com/MUBUTV. This show was produced and created by Ritch, Esra, and Eric Knight. This show would not be here if it weren't for our amazing team, which are the following: interview editors Sarah Nissenbaum and Alex Taylor, show notes and transcriptions by Jani Chang, Nicole Capodoglo, Lilia Owens, and Sarah Nissenbaum, theme music by Disciples of Babylon, and be sure to tune in next week for another episode of the MUBUTV Insider Podcast.